In my previous video, I narrated how Prithu, the Kamrup king, drowned Bakhtiyar Khilji's victory march in a river, and how after fighting off attack after attack, he finally took his own life by drowning himself in a pond within his fortress. However, Prithu's descendants were no less valiant. They shouldered the burden of protecting their motherland and their people with equal valor and strategic brilliance. King Prithu avoided being tortured by the invader by taking his own life in 1228 CE, according to tradition, by drowning himself rather than face capture. But his descendants had to save themselves and their people by agreeing to pay tribute to the Turks. Nasruddin, after making requisite arrangements, returned victorious. As it turned out, Sandhya, the son of Prithu, was not as submissive and compliant as Nasruddin had thought. Before Nasruddin could reach the capital, Sandhya declared himself sovereign. Understandably, the Turks were not likely to stomach Sandhya's mockery of their victory. And Sandhya knew this well. He made thorough preparations for dealing with the next invasion. He shifted his capital to Kamatapur, a place in the present-day Dinhata subdivision of Coach Bihar in West Bengal, and suitably fortified the place for future attacks. When Nasruddin's death in 1229 created a void in Bengal, Sandhya seized the opportunity and extended his kingdom up to the river Karatuya, and pressing further into the Gauda kingdom with the help of some Hindu Bhuiyas, assumed the title of Gaudeshwara. By around 1251, Malik Ikhtiaruddin Uzbek occupied the throne in Bengal and consolidated his power there. After conquering Ayodhya, whose governor he had been earlier, he turned his attention to Kamrup. He was aware of the failures his predecessors had met with there. So in 1257, Ikhtiaruddin gathered a gargantuan force and marched against Sandhya. Sandhya knew he could not face such a disproportionately large force. He evacuated the capital, taking all his people and valuables to the hills. He waited for the rains to come when he would be in a better position to face the enemy. Uzbek entered the abandoned capital and stationed himself there. From his hideout, Sandhya sent a peace proposal, saying he was ready to pay allegiance to the Turks and would pay a yearly tax if his kingdom was returned to him. But the clever Turk was not likely to fall for the ploy. It was too early to forget what had happened to Nasruddin's piece of archers. He rejected Sandhya's proposal outright. Sandhya decided he would face the challenge head-on. What the king did to save his kingdom that day may not be unparalleled in world history, but what his subjects did was unique, if not unprecedented. On the king's appeal, the subjects deposited all their grains in the king's repository and burned the remaining, so the invaders would not find anything in the villages even when they raided them. Fodder for horses and elephants was also destroyed. The Sultan was confronted with the fact that the soldiers sent out to coerce the people into supplying food returned empty-handed. There were no people to be found in the villages, nor a grain of food. In fact, there wasn't a blade of grass for the animals either, the Sultan was informed. Uzbek began preparations for leaving Kamrup. But there occurred an untimely flood. Uzbek was not supposed to understand that this was a man-made disaster. Sandhya's people had created that flood by constructing and then rupturing dams. Uzbek scrambled to escape through the treacherous gaps in the rising water. But he did not know that the king's best archers were lying in wait for him in those passages. Minhajuddin left a vivid account of the Turks' predicament in Kamrup. Uzbek, frustrated on all fronts, hired a local man who would, for a reward, show him the way out of Kamrup. Taking the mountain route was the only option, the guide told him, and Uzbek too could see the merit in the suggestion. The guide led him through a mountainous route, and alas, halfway through a long, narrow mountain pass, the Sultan heard that the other end of the pass was occupied by quote-unquote Hindus. He tried to turn back. In the melee, two Tuskers began to fight. The horror-struck soldiers lost the last bit of their confidence when they heard that the entrance to the pass, which they had used earlier, was also under the occupation of Hindus. At that precise moment, an attack was launched on the hapless lot, killing most and wounding many. In fact, Kamrup soldiers were on all sides. Hundreds of arrows flew at the Turks, instantly turning the narrow pass into a gruesome scene of carnage. The massacre could have been total, but perhaps it was God's design to save some of the innocent soldiers. An arrow pierced the chest of Ikhtiyaruddin Uzbek, who fell to the ground from the back of the elephant he was riding. This brought the battle to a sudden end. Uzbek, together with his family members, including a young son, was captured. When brought before Sandhya, Uzbek expressed his last wish. He wanted to have a glimpse of his son. His son was brought to him, and Uzbek breathed his last with his lips pressed in a final kiss to his son's face. It was after this victory, and not before it, that Sandhya moved his capital in earnest to Kamtapur to guard against future incursions. Several times the Turk and Afghan invaders tasted defeat in Kamrup. By the first quarter of the 14th century, Muhammad bin Tughlaq dispatched a large force against Kamrup. Dullav Narayan, the Kamrup king, was engaged in a fight against the Ahom king, helping his nephew Chao Polai, the Ahom prince who had rebelled against his brother, the reigning Ahom king Sukrang Fa, after their father Sukhan Fa's death in 1332. On hearing about the Sultan's advancing troops, Dullav Narayan naturally hurried back to his capital, and made preparations for countering the Sultan's force. And here the story takes an unexpected, almost noble turn. The Ahom king, the very adversary Durlabnarayan had been locked in combat with only days before, set aside the quarrel the moment he learned about the foreign threat. Without being asked, he dispatched a huge contingent of his own soldiers to stand beside the men he had been fighting. It was a gesture that spoke of something larger than the dispute between them, a recognition that when a foreign invader threatened the soil, old scores could wait. That single act of goodwill, enmity laid down and soldiers sent instead of arrows, remains one of the quieter but more moving turns in this story. The Sultan once again ventured to attack Kamrup in 1333. This time, the ordinary soldiers in the Sultan's army were so terrified by the tales of the exploits of Kamrup soldiers that they began to break ranks and the battle never took place. Then it was the turn of Hussein Shah, the most powerful Sultan of Bengal. He invaded Kamrup when Nilambar of the Khan dynasty was on the throne. When he failed to breach the defenses of the Kamrup king, Hussein Shah adopted an inconceivably treacherous stratagem. He sent a peace proposal, and when it was accepted, he made a novel proposition. The women folk of the two royal families should have a kind of ceremonial gathering to make the friendship a memorable event. He smuggled a group of burqa-clad soldiers into the fort, who opened the gates from inside. More reliable sources, however, attribute the fall of Kamtapur to the treachery of Nilambar's own Brahmin minister Sachipatra, whose son Nilambar had executed for an affair with the queen. The burqa version may be a regional variant of the same betrayal from within theme. King Nilambar and all the members of his family were taken prisoners. But the victory thus earned was short-lived. It was the famed monsoon of Assam that came to the people's rescue. When within roughly a decade of occupying the kingdom, the invaders had to fight the enemy again. Only this time, the enemy was the combined fury of nature and a groundswell of enraged autochthons led by the Bhuiya chief Harup Narayan. Needless to say, the invaders had to flee Kamrup with their tails singed. Tragically, the people of the land not only forgot everything about their glorious past, but also almost lost themselves in the chaotic melting pot of human races that is India's northeast. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to my channel and interact with my videos and suggest what topics I should cover and how I can improve my research and storytelling. Thank you.